Welcome to Interview with the Masters, brought to you by CGMA, the CG Master Academy. I'm your host, Ben Scott. Our guest today is Thomas Pringle, freelance concept artist. Thomas has done work for many prolific clients, including Disney, THQ, Eidos, and Capcom. Before we begin, a reminder that registration for CGMA courses is currently open and will be closing soon. If you haven't yet, visit 2d.cgmasteracademy.com and sign up for the class or classes that best fits your needs. Interview with the Masters is an ongoing series. Keep an eye on our website for more information. For everyone who is joining us today, if you have any questions for Thomas, you'll see in your GoToWebinar control panel a small box titled Questions. Kindly send your questions through the control panel. We will attempt to answer as many questions as possible. Thomas, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for joining us. Unmuted.
Thank you, Ben. Pleasure to be here.
And we're happy to have you here as well, Thomas. If you could, I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, I'm a freelance concept artist, and I work primarily for video game companies, and I do some movie work as well. I was born in 1977 in Copenhagen, Denmark, and has been drawing all my life. And in 2000, I got accepted into design school in Denmark, and pretty much shaped my career after being a concept artist, just practicing all the time and drawing. And then I got a job at Digital Extremes in 2005, I think it was, and worked there for 5 or 6 years, and then went freelance 2 years ago.
Very cool.
That's pretty, yeah.
Now, was your intention always to move into the entertainment industry, or were you working with just art in general?
Well, I've always been drawing on the computer. I had an Commodore Amiga 500, where I did pixel artwork in the 90s. And I did have a stint for a few years at a newspaper in Copenhagen where I did news graphics. But after discovering the internet and figuring out you could make a living doing this stuff, I was quite focused on that.
So you started out, you were able to do pixel art. What has it been like seeing the change of the way art on the computer has developed over time?
Well, it's I guess it's kind of a mixed blessing. Like, it's great you can do this stuff and you can do it fast and all that, but I find that sometimes it gets a little bit tricky, because with traditional art you have to plan it out a bit more, I find. While with the computer you can always go back and you can rework it, and sometimes it gives you a little bit of a bad habit, I find.
Now, when you studied artwork, did you mostly study traditionally, or did your school have a digital program?
It was primarily traditional. The school I went to, like the illustration program, were much more focused on illustration work and geared towards like newspaper cartoons and children book drawings and stuff like that. So I kind of had to convince the teachers that this was something you could do.
How is that?
Pardon?
I was going to say, how has that traditional background informed your digital artwork and your concept art for the entertainment industry?
I think it's helped me quite a bit having a solid foundation. I did a lot of life drawing in school, and I really can't emphasize just how much that has helped me. Like, you learn about shapes, and the thing with life drawing is you can't really cheat it. Like, it's just the pencil and the model, and you're trying to translate it as good as you can, right? So that makes you quite humble, I find. Where on the computer, as everybody knows, you can put in a few highlights and tweak things and change the saturation and all that, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, how have you felt now that you've been working almost fully as a freelance artist? What has that transition been like, working at a studio and then moving into being a freelancer full-time?
You have to have a lot more discipline, I find, because you're structuring your own day, and that means that like there's always something else to do, right? So you really have to be focused on having a daily routine. And are you sharing my desktop now, Ben?
I don't know if it's been sent to you. It says that we should be waiting to view your screen. There might be a pop-up right now that's waiting for you to approve
right.
the view.
I see it here.
Okay, great. Okay, great.
Yes. Well, my friend Ash Thorpe, he posted this thing on Facebook with your daily routine. I don't know if you can see it on my desktop now.
It's probably taking just one moment to connect to the screen for myself and for the other attendees. And it has shown up for me now.
But anyway, the thing is, when you work for yourself, you're not just drawing. You have to answer emails too, and look for work and network and all that, right? So it is a lot more work being freelance, but it's also a lot more rewarding, I find, because you can kind of design your day as you want, and you're working for yourself, right? Which gives you a bit more incentive.
So obviously, like you said, you much prefer the freelance lifestyle. Is there anything that you miss from working in a studio?
Yes, I really miss having the social connections, because as it is, it's just me sitting at home, right? And that's what I miss with the studio life, that you have colleagues that have the same interest, and there's always something to discuss, right? And also professionally, everybody gets stuck looking at their own stuff, and it's good to have fresh eyes on it. Yeah.
Are there any ways that you try to make up for that? Do you use social media? Do you get in touch with people through something like Skype or Instant Message or Facebook?
Yes, I have a lot of friends on Skype that I talk with, and I do the occasional phone call. But I also have a good network here in town, and I try to meet up at least once or twice a week with my former colleagues. So, yeah, that's good.
Very cool. Now, you were showing us you had a few images before we started the webinar that you wanted to share. If you're ready to pull those up and we can start discussing them, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. I'll just grab them here. So, do you want me to talk a little bit about my process, or?
Absolutely. I think people would love to hear a little bit about your thinking behind your imagery.
Right. When I do, like a lot of these images I selected from my private portfolio, and there's a little bit of a difference working commercially compared to when I draw stuff for just my own sake. When I do it for myself, I try to be as random as I can, so I can surprise myself a little bit, if you know what I mean. I'll just load this image up, and I'll talk a little bit about my process. Can you see it on screen?
I can see the image in Bridge right now. I am assuming you're loading it into Photoshop.
Yeah, it should be in Photoshop now.
Okay, it might just take 1 minute for it to come over to our end.
Okay. But anyway, when I work on my own stuff, I tend to use my previous work and just kind of mash it together and overlay images and see if an interesting shape pops out, and then kind of let that guide me. While when you do commercial work, it's a lot more strict. Like, you have to be able to predict the outcome pretty much from the start, and you have to trigger those happy accidents so it doesn't look too forced. So when I do commercial work, I usually start out in grayscale and then add color afterwards, because it's a lot easier to design for me when I do it in grayscale first, because you don't have to think about saturation and color temperature and reflective lighting and all those things. Is the image up on screen?
Yes, it is showing up right now. I'm able to see it.
Okay. So this is the final image I did for my own leisure. and I'll just uncheck the layers here.
Okay.
Can you see a black and white sketch?
We're getting very close to it. Still getting you unchecking the boxes.
Okay, there's a little bit of a lag here.
Yeah, a little bit. Sometimes the video can be a little bit behind the audio, but that's all right. Give it a couple seconds. I'm sure it'll show up.
But anyway, a few years ago, I started drawing a lot in pure black and white because I find that quite liberating. You're only thinking about the graphical shapes and whole composition. And visually, I find that quite interesting because really, any successful image is based on the readability, I find, especially in our field. And if you have a good readability from the start, it's a lot easier to make it successful. And any detail you add afterwards is just bonus, really.
And we're able to see your black and white image now. And the first thing that comes out to me is how very graphical it is. It's almost as if you just have black, white, and then maybe one or two tones of gray.
Yes, that's correct. There's just one tone in the background. And I find that's it's quite easy to do these with the pencil tool. Under the brush menu, there's the pencil tool where you don't have any anti-alias on it.
Okay.
And once I've established that, I try to bring the values a little bit closer together, just so when I add color, there's something to latch onto. If you just have it in pure black and white, it's harder to get the color in there, I find.
Right. And that's the first I've heard of someone using the pencil tool to block that out. Do you use that for the hard edges?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know if there's too much lag for me to do like a little real-time demonstration here.
I'm not sure if there will be either. Right now, I believe you're just pulled up the layer where you've balanced the tones, and it's still taking a moment for it to show up.
Oh, okay. I went back to the black and white now.
Okay. But this is actually a good time for a question from one of our attendees. Is they're asking the process that you take when you're generating this black and white image. I know you mentioned a lot about shapes and finding good shapes. How do you approach that when you're starting this black and white image?
I try to keep it as random as possible. Sometimes I'll take an old image and just desaturate it and crank the levels until it's pure graphical. Then I might flip it upside down and see if I can play with the layer menu, put it to overlay or lighten or darken or something like that, just to get like an interesting pattern going. Or if I have like a rough 3D block out that I've used for something in the past, that's good for getting a sense of space in there. And also another thing I quite like with using the pencil tool is that it's easy to use to get good selections afterwards. If I want to color out that robot spider I got in there, I can just use the magic wand and it'll select everything there, everything that's black, right?
Oh, very cool. Very cool. That's a smart use of the tool, I have to say. That's the first time I've actually heard of someone using the pencil tool for that reason.
Okay. Maybe it's my old pixel graphics background that comes into use then.
It's very fascinating. So it sounds like even more than thinking of the image as what it's intending to represent, you really break it down so that the design communicates clearly with just the shape language.
Yes, exactly. And as I said, that's really what makes a successful image. If you can nail that down, then you got a strong card on your hands, I find. Because if I used to do a lot of copying after photos when I was a bit younger, and I would just start in one corner and just kind of work my way through, like zoomed in all the way, and it doesn't give you an overview. You can't balance things out because you're already very committed to detail. But this way you have everything laid out and you can see where it's heading. And if there's too much black in one area, for example, you can always go over to the other side of the image and balance things out.
And then you were saying the step after this is to try to bring those values closer together so that it works better as you're overlaying the color, correct?
Yeah, and I find that's that for me that's the tricky part. For some reason, I got a good ability to make things in black and white. But once you get color into it, it gets a little bit trickier to get it to latch on and still keep that graphical punch to the image.
Right.
And when I work on my own private work, as I said, I try to keep it as random as possible. And I'll just paste in old images and see if something comes up. So I'm kind of
you use those to bring the color in, or you use those to introduce new shapes?
Both.
Okay.
Once I got the basic black and white sketch down, I tend not to mess too much with the composition, just because I know it looks successful to me.
Hello, Thomas.
But in order to get some...
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry everyone. I have an apology to make. There seems to be some technical difficulty concerning other people joining the session. So I'm going to have to restart this session in order for them to join in. I apologize for the inconvenience, but if you guys bear with me, I'm going to restart the session to allow other people to get into this meeting. So give me about 3 minutes to reset everything and then come back in. Is that okay with everyone?
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. I appreciate it. We'll be right back, gentlemen. And ladies, of course.
Okay.
Okay, I believe we are connected again. I apologize for the technical difficulties that we were having, but everyone should be able to join the session now. Again, our apologies. We are here today with Thomas Pringle, freelance concept artist, and he's discussing the way that he builds an image. Before our short technical break, we were discussing how Thomas begins his image with a very graphical black and white layout, and then he moves through the color phase by bringing his black and white colors to a smaller amount of contrast so that he can overlay colors onto them more easily. And we were just discussing how he begins this process by using photos and other paintings that he uses. Thomas, if you'd like to pick that conversation back where we were, that'd be fantastic.
Right. I'll just uncheck my layers here. So I was explaining how having a strong black and white silhouette shape really helps me define the image and balance things out and get me going on a good solid graphical shape that I can then add color to. And I quite enjoy using the pencil brush just because it keeps things simple and it doesn't add value or like gradients. And it helps me when I want to select a certain area. I can just click the magic wand tool and it'll pick it up right to the edge. So once I've defined my graphical shapes and got a good read in the image, I start overlaying stuff to see if I can get a good color palette going, and just looking for those happy accidents that'll trigger my next steps. And I don't know how much lab there's on this pen, but can you see that I started checking layers on again?
Yes, I've seen that you've started to check some layers on.
Okay. So now we have like what would be the equivalent to an underpainting. And what I'm really looking for is interesting color shifts. And I don't know, maybe I can go in here. I tend to toggle through the menu modes for the layer. And just see if there's something that's interesting, and then I'll erase things out and push things back and push things to the front and things like that. And really just trying to keep that graphical shape in mind, but focusing more on color and where I want to take the image. And I want to emphasize this is what I do when I do personal work. When I do commercial work, you have to be a little bit more specific, because you have to steer things in a certain direction, so you are guaranteed a good outcome, I guess.
So how would you say that this process is different from your process when working with a client?
Well, I'm quite a lot more free in my approach when I do my own stuff. When you're doing commercial work, there's always a certain pressure or a certain expectation from the client that they want things to go in a certain direction. Like if they want a spaceship, I can't just draw a giant robot. You know? So I try to plan things out a little bit more when I do commercial work, and I usually do a couple of sketches just for my own sake, just to get familiar with the subject and see if one angle works compared to another. And they don't have to be like, they don't have to take a lot of time. A lot of them I spend maybe 10 minutes on, and I find out it's a dead end, and I'll try something else. And then you take it from there.
Now,
Sorry?
When you're first sending your ideas to your clients, do you begin with those black and white sketches? Do you send those to them? Do you normally work it out to a color sketch? What is the first image that your client will see in the direction you're taking?
Right. I've started more and more using this graphical approach as well for clients, just because it's quite fast to get things going, and the client can say, this is the direction we want, or this is not the direction, and you give them options, right? So I find that's a good approach, and you stay away from detail, which can lock you in at an early stage, and that's not good when you want to keep your options open. Yeah.
Now, this often happens to be the case with concept art, that there tends to be quite a few images you create that are just preparatory, that aren't actually the final image that the client is looking for. What percentage of the work you do would you say are those images that end up just getting tossed in the bin?
That's hard to say. It depends a bit on the project as well. But it's like everything with concept art is a process towards the end result, right? And a lot of the stuff I have on my website that's commercial work, there might have been like 15 sketches before that, before the end result, where you try to narrow things down, and the client finds out that what they were looking for is not really what they were looking for, and stuff like that, right? So I wouldn't consider that work wasted, because it's,
right.
As I said, this stuff is a process, right? And you have to sometimes figure out what you don't want in order to get what you want, right? So yeah, that's a little bit tricky to answer.
So there is a good part of it that has to be comfortable with being willing to take a new direction and not getting too attached to the piece that you're submitting to your client.
You fell out a little bit, Ben?
My apologies. The question was, there has to be a certain ability that you have to not get so close to the images that you're sending out so that you can take it in the direction that the client wants so that you can approve the image for what they're looking for.
Yes, definitely. And sometimes you find that you've really nailed it and this is my best work yet. But if it's not what the client wants, you have to take it in a different direction, right? But yeah, I find it's quite important not to get too attached to it and being able to kill your darlings, as they say. Because after all, you're working on somebody else's time and the client is always right. That doesn't mean you can't give your own suggestions and opinions, but at the end of the day, somebody else is in charge, right?
Mm-hmm. So how do you balance recommending your own suggestions and opinions with being sure that you're meeting the client's expectations?
Well, most of the time you meet at eye level, I find, and it's more of a collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the art director is under pressure from his peers as well to deliver what is expected, right? So, yeah, sometimes I've been on projects where the art director has said that this is obviously not a good idea, but we have to exclude that option before we can move ahead with other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, returning back to this image that we're looking at right now, I've noticed that with the layers that you've brought in, there's lots of very small details, but the original sketch is still very readable. Where do you take this image now?
Well, once I've kind of got a palette going, then I start to paint again. And I might go back to my first layer that's black and white, and just with the magic wand select everything, and then I'll hide the selection. It'll still be selected, but it'll be hidden, and I'll make a new layer here. I'm not sure if you can see this stuff in real time.
It's going a little bit slowly.
Okay.
But I did see you select the original layer in the magic wand.
Okay, and now I've made a new layer, and I still have the selection on. I've just hidden it, but I've selected all the black parts in the image, and then I can start actually painting. I consider this like an underpainting, just to have some color in there, and then I'll start thinking about the lighting. If you have like a bit of backlighting, you can start adding in some highlights, for example. And this is a great way to work to keep your edges clear. And I'll just switch back and forth. Maybe I'll deselect my selection and just start painting. And yeah, there's really no great secret to it. It's just you have to keep doing it right. But in terms of, I don't know what to say about this. At this stage, I try to consider the lighting, but not to that point where it dictates everything. You wanna have it present well, and if it doesn't match the lighting, that's okay, as long as it looks good. You can always make up an excuse and say there's a light somewhere outside of the frame or something like that, right?
But essentially,
go ahead.
Essentially, at this stage, you have your selection, and this is allowing you to work on the main areas of the composition without running your paint into the background. It allows you to focus on the individual elements.
Yeah, exactly. And it keeps my edges nice and crisp. As far as the lighting go, I've done this so many times that I kind of just I do it on reflex, if you can say that. And I find you don't want to get too committed to technicalities because it kind of hinders the creative flow a little bit. And I find it's the same with perspective. If the perspective looks good, it's okay, you know. And I'm showing this image. If you align all the perspective lines into the vanishing point, they probably wouldn't quite align up. Because it looks okay, it works, right? But yeah, to sum up what I do with these things, with these kind of images, I do a strong graphical shape to start with, get that going, and then I'll try to generate an underpainting by adding in layers with colors and setting them to overlay or darken or lighten, and just to see if I can get something going, and then I'll paint on top of that afterwards.
So it sounds like a lot of your approach is very experimental. You really want to see what you can get by trying out this method and that method until you find something that pops out to you.
Right. At least for my private work. I can show you a piece I did for Darkness 2.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Where I started with a rough block out.
Great.
I did, this is my brush with 3D. I did a quick block out in SketchUp. Just like very simple geometric shapes. I don't know if that's on screen now.
Right now I'm personally am still seeing your Photoshop closing.
You think clowns are scary? Try health
it is
coverage.
refreshing the whole screen as you bring up the new image.
Okay.
But as we wait for the image to pop up, you did mention that you used SketchUp. Have you found that that's been a useful tool in your new workflow?
Yes, I really like the way you can design the composition. It's almost like being a photographer, finding the best angle to present it from. So you can show as much as possible, but also really get the shapes to work from a good angle. And is the block out up?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay. So I did this quick block out in 3D, and from there, because this is for a commercial project, so you want to steer it in the right direction from the start. So what I did was I did this block out, and then I slowly added color in, and the idea was to kind of show a busy city street. It was this mansion that was situated on top of this high-rise building, but I wanted to capture the feel of the city below. And once I got the block out going, I went back to the approach I showed before with layering stuff in to get a good underpainting. And once you got your basic color scheme going, it's a lot easier to add detail, I find, because you have this underpainting that you can control your values from. The lighting is coming from below, and you've got that established. You got your composition established, and you got the graphical shapes established. So anything you add from there on is a lot easier to incorporate into the image.
Now, when you built this image up, you don't bother when you bring out a SketchUp, rendering it or getting rid of any of the lines. You keep all that in there and use those as guides as you continue the image.
Yeah, pretty much. I find it confuses me a little bit to have the lighting in the 3D render. Just from experience, like sometimes clients will give me a 3D image to paint over, and I find it's a lot easier to color it up if there's no lighting already there. and I'm not quite sure why that is, but but I think it's easier to control it when you have full control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you often use those lines as somewhat of a perspective so that you can get a better idea of perspective?
Yes, definitely, and I find that's the strong force of 3D, that if you have repetitive shapes or a lot of geometry in there, it's a lot easier to control your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, with SketchUp, with those lines, it's easy to make selections as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps quite a bit. I can show the final image here. I don't know. There's some photo in there, and when I use photos, I try to incorporate it so it has the same feel as the rest of the image.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like a little bit painterly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it is tricky using photos because you'll paste something in and you think that looks great, but you get a little bit controlled by all the detail in the photo, I find.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I find it quite important to have your values and your composition and all those basic things set in stone before you take it to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you do to your photos to make them feel more painterly? Do you simply paint on top of them? Do you run them through a filter before you drop them in? What kind of approach do you take?
Sometimes I'll put them on an overlay, for example, or I'll put them on a layer set to darken or something like that, and I'll just play around with the levels and contrast, or I'll use the eraser tool with a bit of blur on it to kind of fade it into the background, and then I'll paint a little bit on top of it just to incorporate it.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of our attendees has noticed, in reflection to 3D, that many concept artists are moving into using both 2D and 3D tools. Have you noticed that yourself, and do you feel like it's important that concept artists branch out into using these new tools?
Yeah, definitely. I would like to do more 3D as well, like ZBrush. I just, at the time, I don't really have the gap in my schedule for that. But yeah, I definitely see it around me, and there's a lot more people doing that. I don't know if 2D will be completely replaced, just because there's always a time pressure to things, right? And 3D still takes a lot more time than 2D. And with 2D you can experiment a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would like to move a little bit more into 3D.
Mm-hmm. I see you have some other images here for you to share as well.
Mm-hmm. This is an image I did for some posters I'm selling through a Dutch company, and that's pretty much the same process as I showed with the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking for those happy accidents starting out in graphic shapes. You can see I used the other painting with the spider robot.
Mm-hmm.
And I try just to overlay stuff until something comes up that I feel I can latch onto.
Mm-hmm.
And with this one I moved into color a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I find that you want to change your workflow a little bit once in a while, just so you don't get too stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And the outcome becomes a little bit more unpredictable. With this image, I really like that backlighting I had. I don't know if you can see, I checked the layers on here. and I wanted to do something with the light coming from the back. And then I kind of worked the image up around that.
So it sounds like you can take inspiration from any different part of the image. You might like something with backlighting, you might be interested in something with a shape. You're just looking for anything that can push your image forward.
Yes, exactly. And again, this is for my private work, where you have that freedom to go in whatever direction you want to go. But yeah, I find when I create an image, there has to be some kind of hook that you can latch onto, like something that there has to be some part of the image that's interesting where you think, I want to emphasize that, and then take it from there.
Do you find that experimenting in your personal work often leads to workflows that you can now use in your professional work? Sometimes it fails miserably, and then you have to try again. But that's the beauty of doing things for yourself, right? That you have that option to fail, and I think that's a little bit underestimated, because that's when you really learn things, I find. Then you can figure out why did that go wrong, and yeah, you have a chance to experiment. I did find with that graphic black and white approach, that has helped me quite a bit in my commercial work. As I said, presenting quick sketches to the client where you're not too committed to detail, and you can turn them out pretty fast. Is a great. And I probably wouldn't have done that if I hadn't done things for myself, you know. So would you say with your professional work, you try to use a more tried and true pipeline than you necessarily would with your personal work?
Yes, because there's always a deadline looming, and I find with concept work you have a lot less time to present it. Often it's you'll talk with the art director in the morning, and then by 6 o'clock at night you have to have something, right? And you want to show at least at the start of the project, you want to show a variety of options, so they have something to choose from, or something to present to the producer, so whatever it's going to be used for, right? Yeah.
I'm reading right now questions from our attendees. One of our attendees is asking what additional things you design. Today we've looked at quite a few environments. Do you also work with characters, vehicles, props, or what you tend to do mostly environments? What kind of work do you mostly do professionally?
It's almost exclusively environments. I do some spaceship designs once in a while. I have a lot of those laying around, but unfortunately I can't show them, which is a shame, because I would like to show that approach too. But yeah, it's primarily environments, and I find most concept artists are either character guys or environment guys, just because you have to specialize quite a bit. Do you
find that specializing has improved your ability to work with clients?
Yes, definitely. And you get a lot more experience in one field, right? So usually when people contact me, potential clients, they know that they want environment work, and they've looked me up, and yeah, that's it. But yeah, I would like to branch out a little bit more, but it's just time, right?
Now, was specializing something that you set out to do from the beginning, or is that something that you found as you've worked professionally?
I've always been interested in environment work, and I've always kind of liked like the ambience of artists like John Harris, for example. And so yeah, I was quite focused in going in that direction, just because that's where my interest lies. Also looking at movies, it's always been the environments that has been visually interesting for me. So that was pretty much my focus since I started in school.
So between your personal work and your commercial work, how do you balance your time so that you're getting enough to do both?
Yeah, that's always tricky. Lately, I haven't been doing that much private work, just because I've been quite busy. But else, I try. I say I try to, but I don't always stick to this. But I try to do an hour of private work a day, just to keep the interest going. But sometimes you're working like 10 or 12 hours a day, right? And you don't always have the time to do private work.
Is there ever a time with painting that you feel like you're just burnt out and you need to refresh? And if that is the case, what do you do in those situations?
Yeah, I get that. I think every artist get burned out at some point. But you just have to step away for it for a while, go for a walk and read a book or something. I find if I try to force it, it never turns out good. So if I'm stuck with something and I can't get it going, I'll walk away from it and try to think about something else for a while. Come back and try a different approach, or yeah, you can't. When I was in school, I was always working and always practicing, and I found I got quite burned out, and I would try to push through that, and the outcome was never very good. You get depressed and you get tired of looking at your own stuff. So yeah, I find you have to step away from it and do something else for a bit.
Are there any other painters that you find inspiration from?
Well, I mentioned John Harris, which is he did book covers in the 70s and 80s as well, I think. I don't know if he's still around. But yeah, I quite like what he did. He had like strong graphical shapes and a lot of mist and fog in his images, and it was sci-fi motifs. There's so many artists out there that are great, so I don't know. Obviously, everybody loves Craig Mullins, right?
Right, of course.
Yeah. But I find more and more these days that you just have to look on Facebook or online, and there's tons of stuff, right? And a lot of it is in the same vein, but once in a while you'll see something original.
Now, when you're looking for inspiration, do you tend to look at other artists, look at photography, watch films? Where do you build that inspiration?
Right. I find nature is the biggest inspiration, because everything stems from that. Like patterns in nature, for example, they can be interesting to look at. Yeah, movies as well. Movies are a great reference for lighting and composition and those things. So I don't know if I can pinpoint my inspiration to one thing. Sometimes when I start an image for myself, I have a very specific idea, and sometimes I don't. And you have to kind of carve the image out. It's yeah, I don't know with inspiration. It comes from all around, you know. Music is a great inspiration too sometimes.
So it sounds like your general philosophy is just to be open to the things that are around you and allow that to fuel your work.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I think that correlates a bit to the workflow as well. If you're too set in your ways of how you create an image, you'll get quite stuck in what you do, and you'll repeat yourself.
Mm-hmm.
While if you try to keep the workflow open,
mm-hmm.
you can once in a while you can surprise yourself.
Do you have any recommendations for keeping yourself open and preventing yourself from becoming too closed off to inspiration and too closed off at attempting new workflows?
Well, I think that primarily is to keep your workflow open, and then I quite like reading about history and what make things tick in society and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I find even though it don't necessarily reflect on the image, it's
mm-hmm.
good to have a solid knowledge of how things work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in the case of being locked down, I guess it's just keeping an open mind and not disregarding everything.
It sounds like you continue to keep learning.
Yes, I guess any artist is never completely satisfied with an image, right?
Mm-hmm.
You always want to take it to that next step, and the only way you can do that is by keeping an open mind.
Mm-hmm. I believe you had one more image to share with us today. You were discussing a little bit about life drawing.
Oh yeah, that's right. This is an older life drawing I did. But we had when I was in school, we had a lot of life drawing,
mm-hmm.
and it wasn't mandatory, even though I was in illustration. But I went every time,
mm-hmm.
and I really found that was that really helped me learn, because you have to figure out how the model stands in the room. You have to figure out the shapes
mm-hmm.
and how to design the figure, the weight of the figure. And even though you might think that doesn't really correlate to environment work, I find it really does, because you have to find that density in things.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said earlier, you can't really cheat life drawing. You have
mm-hmm.
to nail it with the pencil, right?
Mm-hmm. So would you say that your life drawing had a direct positive effect on your environment work?
Yes, I think it did. When I started in school, as I said earlier, I did a lot of copying photos,
mm-hmm.
and it gave me a good idea of how to do technical stuff and surface details and stuff like that. But I really didn't have a sense of space, and I didn't have a sense of perspective and shapes and lighting and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing life drawings, that really gets enforced on you, and it makes you a little bit humble as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you continue to do life drawing and studies as you are now working professionally?
I would like to say yes to that, but I haven't done life drawing in a couple of years. I'm actually looking into starting that up again, but I haven't done life drawing in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I really missed it, and I want to get going again on that.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any recommendations for our attendees on continuing to advance their own artwork, or things to keep themselves sharp as they are working?
Right. I find, well, at least for me, and I've seen it in other students when I was in school, that when you start out, you tend to copy people that you like, other artists that you like, and I find you have to be a little bit careful about that.
Mm-hmm.
just because you want to convey yourself as an artist. Like, you're the only one who can do what you do, right? So you don't want to be an imitation of somebody else, even though it might give you a little bit of a shortcut or give you faster results. And I would say not to get too hung up in the technical details of Photoshop, for example. Yeah, don't rely too much on the cheap tricks and learn the basics. If you know the foundations, you can work even if you don't have a computer, right? And just keep at it. Yeah, that's it.
Now we're nearly running out of time right now. But before we go, I did want to thank everyone for joining us today and listening to Thomas Pringle discuss a little bit about where he came from. And again, Thomas, thank you for joining us. And for those of you that are here, I do want to remind you that registration for CGMA courses is still currently open, but will be closing soon. So if you haven't yet, please visit 2d.cgmasteracademy.com and sign up for the class or classes that best fits your needs. Thomas, again, thank you very much for joining us. And I think we have a thank you from everyone else who's here. And I think that everyone else here has a big thank you for joining us as well.
My pleasure. It was fun.